Hello, real estate rock stars. It is Sarah Denick from Indiana. And today you are going to want to tune in. This is going to be a fun drive, walk, whatever you're doing. We have Jenny Yee with us today out of Austin, Texas. And her background is amazing. Like, I cannot wait to dig into some of this. It is so impressive. Welcome to the show, Jenny.
Thanks for having me. I super appreciate it. I'm excited about this. This is going to be a fun show. Like your guys' reputation and the education and all the things that you put out. More importantly, your community, because you guys are such a vibe. Like this is super exciting.
Such a vibe. Yes, yes. So I mean, where to get started here? Looking at your bio, the experience that you have with investing and flipping and rentals and all of those things, I want to get into that. You're actually not a licensed realtor, though, right? You're
No,
okay.
no.
So, kind of get into how you got into that and kind of the beginnings and how that all happened for you.
For sure. So I started out flipping on the side. It was something that I always thought was just, for fun. I'd give it a try. The market was good. It was pre-COVID. I say that to say that I still think flipping is a totally viable option now post-COVID, just FYI. But I started in pre-COVID just for myself for fun. And then it turned out that I had a knack for it. And my flips were kind of flying off the market very quickly. Part of that, and we'll delve into this later sessions, is because the things and choices that I would choose was like a game to me, as far as like budget and as far as like marking things down. And before I knew it, I had other investors approach and they were like, well, we'd love to be in on this with you. And at first I was like, it's one thing when it's your own money. And then like, it's another thing when people offer their money. And I'm like, are you like sure about this? Like, are you like doubly, triply sure? It's like, it's a whole nother level at that point. One, absolutely. So I did that. And then at the time was investing in long-term rentals outside of US military bases, outside of Fort Bragg at the time, because it's such a hot market. And then transitioned those to short-term rentals. And then from there, just things just kind of, I don't know. It's hard to say. Like, I wish I could say that I was smart enough to have seen this trajectory from the get-go. It'd be like, oh, no, I had A, B, C, D, E, F, G plan. No, not at all. It was just seeing opportunity, understanding where I was coming from. I went through an ugly divorce early on. So figuring out how to like navigate things that life throws your way that you don't expect, but how do you keep leveling up? And that was kind of the niche. And then from there, sold off my entire short-term rental portfolio for not just a profit on the property side, but a profit on the business side, and then created a design firm. So now we have a full-fledged firm, and our goal now is to help investors. So like we do a lot of hospitality, short-term rentals, hotels, mid-term rentals, but we also do other things. So like we work with realtors, we work with property managers, we work with multifamily investors and help them fix budgets, choose items, choose prices, choose finishings that like keep their property so they actually max out their ROI. And that's kind of how, because my background was investing first, that just kind of spontaneously developed. And if you'd asked me 4 years ago, 5 years ago, if this is what I'd be doing, I would have said no, but I wouldn't change it for the world now.
That's so fun. It's that entrepreneur spirit, that you can make anything out of, what you're good at and really double down on that, and make it profitable. So that's awesome. How do you source these deals initially? Like, where did you find these first few flips? Because I feel like, that's half the battle, as a flipper
Okay.
myself, is finding the deals.
For sure. You're not wrong. So when I first started, I remember I was just perusing. I mean, I hate to say it, like I was perusing Zillow, honestly. Like I was just kind of like just perusing the neighborhood because I knew the area at the time. So like I started out with neighborhoods that I knew would have a big bang for their buck. And I was like, these are good neighborhoods that are undervalued. In this case, because it was right outside of a military base, which is, by the way, one of my favorite places to invest just in general. I think it's an undervalued strategy. It can be applied for a lot of things, but the reason being is because It's something that has a high turnover rate. So you've always guaranteed a lot of people coming in and a lot of people going out. So you've got a turnover rate as far as it comes to property market and value. So that's always going to be there. And that rate of these types of places, like they're not affected by big picture things that are going on in the market because the federal government and the military is going to constantly be running no matter what. So like they're kind of like a guaranteed safe space, kind of a safe investment bubble. So what I did was look at the markets that were or the neighborhoods that had been built around the time period that the base had been built. So like the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So these were older homes that had existed that had not been updated yet, which means that there was a lot of meat on the bones because most people aren't going to be paying that amount, but they're going to be selling it at bottom dollar. But because of proximity to base, they're going to be wanting it. So the demand was high, but the price was low. So looking at that in Zillow, I just started getting an idea of like, oh, well, these are kind of the price points that these things are selling at normally, what people are actually paying to live in, because there are a lot of retirees there. So I would just start putting in price points that were lower than that. And I thought in my head, well, I wonder how much I can make and how low I can go. And sure enough, what would keep popping up are the really bottom dollar ones, the ones that were selling off. And at the time, it just turned out that like most of the people selling were either retirees or people getting out of that neighborhood who had lived in there for a long time. And either their family had passed or their parents had passed and they didn't know what to do with it. It was an older home, like they didn't have the flipping skills. So that was my first way of finding them, like was just kind of honestly digging into the data, like the data itself. So I think there are other ways to do it now, but I do think that that's a good way to start because as you start going through that, you really start to learn your neighborhoods yourself. And there's something like intuitive, like, for example, like data can tell you a lot, but there is something intuitive about that extra level of knowledge that can really help you push the realm of what you can get on your return. And we see that with our investors, like on the Airbnb side. So like, for example, like AirDNA is a good data-based foundation to figure out markets to invest in. But what happens is that AirDNA is the quantitative data. It's not the qualitative data. So AirDNA will take all the basic facts and numbers about bedrooms, bathrooms, square footage, et cetera, amenities. But what it doesn't take into account are some of the qualitative things that you can't measure unless you have that experience in that market. And that's like, oh, this design is actually better than the other design. Like you can push your nightly rate higher and there's going to be a higher demand. Or this functions better because you understand that a family is the guest avatar for here. So if you put this, that's outside of the realm of an amenity, but it functions in a certain, so like there's certain qualitative things that you only get when you yourself like are in the data and not just relying on data.
Yeah. I think that's such a strong point, and I think it's something that, we talk about in our business a lot and with our brokers is who is your avatar? You need to figure out who the avatar of it is so then you know how to manage the deal. For instance, if you find a house and it has 3 bedrooms or plus and it could be a great starter home for a family, maybe all the design goes around what a family's looking for. They want storage. They want those closet, they just want all these things. They want a garage, they want a yard, they want it to be safe. So really evaluating each property hyper locally and, tailoring the entire experience around that. So that's so cool.
100%. 100%. And I love that you use the word experience because that's what we use in our firm, no matter what type of property it is. Like, no matter who's coming to us, whether it's a realtor or a property manager or an investor, like you are crafting an experience. People expect their home to be an experience. People expect their businesses, aka their Airbnb or MTR, to be an experience. And then your hospitality hotel should be an experience. So like there is that expectation that we've gone far beyond. Investors treat properties as properties. People who are buying, aka where you get your money from, treat properties as experiences. So like that mindset is huge.
I agree. And it's when you walk in that house, what it looks like, what it smells like, what the
Right.
updates are. Can your
Mhm.
avatar see themselves living in that home? And that's what's going to sell all day long. So
Yeah,
that's a
100%.
great tip. I do have to ask, how come you never got licensed?
So funny. So I considered it for a while. My background is in law. So I did go to law school and I actually worked law in a many millions of years ago. I was doing it when I started flipping because I was just tired of, I I was never meant to be a lawyer. That was just not my like it drained me more than fulfilled me. So which is why I originally started doing flipping because I loved it more. Um, so with that, I thought for sure the long-term goal would have been actually to do flips and then get my real estate license and kind of stay in that avenue. But then when other business opportunities started coming up and realizing that I could make a better profit and I could run a better, honestly, just run a better business for my personality type based on doing a design firm and serving people like you guys who had their license and had that knowledge base, I found myself, and it's really knowing who you are so that you can put your effort into it. I did not want to put my effort into learning all the schematics and the business side of what you guys do. I wanted to put my effort into growing a business a different way and filling a gap that I didn't see, which was investor friendly design. So to answer long answer to your question, I'd considered it, but it just wasn't the right fit for me.
Yeah, I understand that. And also, I'm sure that you being somebody who purchases, I'm sure realtors are bringing you deals. And if you were licensed yourself, you would be sourcing those all. So maybe that actually gives you more opportunity. I don't know. But we have a lot
What
in
I
common.
love, yeah, and I think that it's the concept like we work all over the nation. So we work all over the nation, and we worked internationally too. So at this point, we have 22 states and 3 countries under our belt. But I think if I had chosen the route of becoming an expert like you guys in one area, it would have limited the ability to grow this particular niche and actually offer a service that could help. So and I think that that's kind of just a takeaway, both for investors, also for realtors too, is that when you see a gap and you see a niche, like fill the gap. Like you don't have to pigeonhole yourself like as people have presented something to you, like figure out what a problem is and solve that. And you can do that in the realm that you're doing that in. And I have met and work with so many realtors like you guys who are vast experts and like they talk eons over my head. But what I can talk is the same language of like what I can help them with. And that's what we love doing.
Yeah. And that was a big question that I had is how are you able to 22 states, 3 countries, that's amazing. Like that is out of control, amazing. Kudos to you. And I was wondering, how is she finding all these pockets? Like, how are you an expert on so many different states and countries? That would take a lot of research, but now it makes a little more sense that you're going to the person who knows that. And you're actually probably saving a ton of time. And even though you're not getting the commission of the buy and sell, you're probably getting so much more because you're focusing
Right.
on what you're really good at and where you shine.
Yes. Yes, 100%. We fill in the gap of, so if you guys, for example, as a realtor comes to us and you guys come to us for different ways. You guys come to us when you're like, hey, I've got a buyer, they need to improve their home. And I think that we can get this, but I think that if we lower their budget, we're going to provide enough cushion. Or if we choose different finishes, we're actually going to increase their ROI. So like at that point in time, what I'll do is I'll be like, all right, because I've got this step-by-step process that applies pretty much to any market in general. And it's like how you really do get your return. And it's like assessing your class of your property. So like always start there, what class property it is. Because once you can determine what class your property is in, you can determine the type of buyer that you're going to be attracting. And that buyer, now that you know what that buyer is, you can understand what expectations are. So whether those expectations are in middle of Bourbon Trail, Kentucky, or whether they're, in Nashville or whether they're in California, there's a baseline. Once you can understand what kind of expectations people are going to be doing at that class property point, then you can start to hone in on what the experience is and what type of budget you should actually be working in and what type of return you want, depending on what your property is. So it's actually not that hard. And then once you start to do it over time, so on the Airbnb side, like I started out with myself doing it, but then that grew to a team. That grew. Now I have a firm where we have multiple. So like we go. So it wasn't virtual. We were actually going and doing these setups. So we're meeting the people. We were understanding the market. We were learning the guest avatar. We were seeing the nuances. We understand the changes over the past 4 years. So you really start to just learn people and places and culture. And once you really hone in and know that, then the figuring out and helping an investor or a realtor on that side actually becomes very easy because it's just all about what kind of experience do you need to create to get your money back.
So walk me through that. So let's
Yeah.
say that I'm a realtor here in Indiana,
Yeah.
and I have a client. Are you helping these clients flip and walking them through the process, or is this their forever home that you're help designing?
It
Where
could
does
be
that?
any of the above.
Okay,
So we have realtors come at different stages. So some realtors are like, hey, I'm working with someone they need to improve their property in order to sell it. Like they want to sell it right now. They lived in it for however long. It needs to be updated in order to get a better, a better return. Can you help us with that? To which it's like, okay, let's assess how much you really should be putting into this in order to get the type of return you want to get. Or we have other realtors that come to us and are like, hey, I've got a client that wants to start flipping or who wants to flip. Can you work with them to help choose finishes, budgets, schematics, etc.? Yeah, we can do that. That's not a problem.
so the
Let's talk
agent's
about.
finding the property, putting in the offer, getting the price right, and then you're coming in to consult. I think you should do these finishes. And yeah, it's the same thing. So if the house is 150,000, you're probably not looking at 42-inch cat. Well, you might be, but like quartz or, engineered hardwood, you're looking more at LVP as opposed to if a house is, 700,000, you're not putting LVP, you're probably going to go with the engineered hardwood. So knowing what level that is, and that's so interesting. So I love this model, and we've been doing something a little similar. So we did a luxury flip, and we're there every day. We met all the neighbors, everybody's coming by, and someone says, "Hey, can you sell my house?" And I said, "Yes, I can. We can sell it as is, or if you allow me to do a renovation and this is your budget, this is what I think you're actually going to get when we list." So we go in and we do the design, we GC the deal, we take a percentage of that, and then we sell it on the back end. And sometimes if we really set records, we can do more of like a sliding scale that you can even get more, which is so interesting. And we personally are using a lot of AI rendering. So we scale things to what it looks like. Here's the kitchen. This is the scale, the measurement. This is where everything's going to go. And these are going to be the finishes ish. How are you guys doing that? Because that's such an interesting model that I haven't heard anybody who has like a firm that actually does this nationwide, worldwide.
Yes, which is why which one of the reasons we list. So we and pretty much everybody in the firm has the same passion is that we love helping your everyday person create something of value and meaning to them. So like, and people as investors or real estate buyers, sometimes, and even as real estate agents, we still tend to think of the property as just a piece of property, but to everybody else that who either ends up buying it, ends up living in it, who ends up staying in it, it's so much more than that. So, and the thing is like, as you're buying these properties and you're doing these things, like your every person who's in this is really creating a legacy. Like they're selling a house, but the cash back and cash flow, oftentimes they're either selling memory. So they're really highly emotionally invested. So being able to speak that balance between, okay, I understand this is where you made memories, but if you really want this value exchange, because that's what it is, it's an exchange of your emotions to the exchange of money that's coming in. Here's a third party person who can help you make these decisions more logically based on data and numbers, but can still speak to the emotion. So, in certain times, like we can play a mediator that oftentimes a real estate agent finds himself, doesn't necessarily never wanted to be in. So, and it's nice to be able to kind of bridge that gap sometimes because I think the other thing is that sometimes your everyday person wants to give a realtor the benefit, but just like any other industry, Google's out there. So they start searching all these things. So they have all these questions and all these doubts. And then if they can, if a realtor can push and say, actually, here's an investment design firm, this is what they specialize all across the country. They're saying this advice, like this is something, it adds a different weight that takes a burden off of you guys, oftentimes for certain types of clients that you guys have. So, but the model is, again, it's just filling in a gap. And the key is I think that sometimes when we first started out, the hard part was convincing people. Well, I take that back. I thought the hard part was going to be convincing people that there was a need because I think in the real estate industry, there's so much of the we can do it all mentality. Like we can, flippers are like, well, I'm flipping. I'm going to save on myself. I'm going to go to Home Depot. I'm going to source these things. I'm going to look at what everybody else is doing. And I'm going to do the exact same thing. Well, you did the exact same thing and your market's been house has been on the market for 60 days because
You
you
got
did the
some
exact same thing.
results.
Yes. Like, Or real estate agents sometimes by default and knowledge in this space are like, well, we see these trends. If you're in this neighborhood at such and such place down the street, we know that you need to go ahead and buy stone countertops because you don't have any in order to sell. So that's what we're going to recommend. And they're going to be like, all right, let's just mark off granite. But the thing is that you can tick off boxes because that's often what happens in paperwork. People think about boxes being ticked off in order to get a value price. But what they're not saying, for example, there was one, and the guide that I gave you guys actually use this as an example so your listeners can go to it and see. Is like there was a Class B property, and in this particular Class B property, uh, it was in that fine line between it could be pushed up to a B plus, A minus, but it was still in that B. So you were attracting kind of a lot of people socioeconomically who would buy Class B, but because of where it was at, there was that little bit extra. So oftentimes in Class B, you're looking at stone countertops of various different kinds, whether it's granite, whether it's quartz, whether it's, upper echelon. So there's a whole range. But what we did based on budget in order to actually save is we used concrete countertops. So concrete countertops were cheaper than the stone countertops, but they were still nicer than what you would find as far as hard surface or resin, et cetera, on the lower side, B minus or lower. So we found that middle ground. So we saved a lot of money by choosing to do concrete over granite. And then what we did instead too is that we played that up by choosing cabinets that were the exact same price point as before, but were more modern looking. So the whole feel of the property itself became very different, but at a slightly cheaper cost to do. And it's because it was so vastly different than everything that was in that market. It's sold in less than 10 days. So like there are these funny nuances of being able to assess not just a checklist, but like where do we hone everything in so that person walks in and they get that HGTV moment essentially.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, that's creating the vibe, and those
Mhm.
little details are really, people don't think it's that big of a deal. Well, it is because it just creates this whole, especially when they see the photos, the consumer, they're like,
Mhm.
"I love this. I have to see it." And that's what gets them in the door to see that difference.
And you don't have to spend more in order to get that.
Yeah.
You can keep a budget. People should stay on a budget. We are super advocates about
We
staying
hate
on
that
budget.
B word though. I do.
It's
I
true.
hate when my husband tells me about I'm out of budget on a flip. I'm like, "No." He's
Yeah.
like, "You don't live here."
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And
Yep.
how do you, if you're going to all these different locations, I'm sure supply and demand and sourcing becomes, an issue because things cost, it's different costs at different things. Like maybe here in Indiana, we have a ton of limestone. So, that's a lot of things are built out of that, but it might be more to get that in California. How are you figuring out each location, what's the best value and also the different aesthetics? Because, here in Indiana, our houses are all brick. If you go to, California, they're different because we have different climates. So you have to have everything is dependent on what the climate changes are. So how do you stay up to date with all the aesthetics and different locations and figure all that out?
Yeah, no, for sure. And that's a fantastic question. So I think your traditional, so this is what's interesting when you talk about like traditional interior design versus investment friendly design. So your traditional interior design is going to push more on certain aspect of trends and spending and the which is why most people don't go to interior designers because they charge for all their knowledge. So, and which is fair. The amount of there's a vast, just like you guys are undervalued in how much work you put behind the scenes, interior designers are also undervalued. So that is a level. But when it comes to investment friendly design, the way that we keep track of it is that understand it goes back to the property, the property class really is the essential key piece in all of this. So if you're coming to me in Indiana, so let's say we're in Indianapolis for example, which we've done a couple projects in. So like we actually did a Nightmare Before Christmas Airbnb in Indianapolis.
I love
Um,
that.
yeah. Um, it goes back. So once you have your property class, then you actually go in specifically to your competition related to that specific property. So my goal is not to take this property and make it the most trendy. My goal is to beat out the competition either within or lower than your budget so you can get a better ROI. So we spend our times. Yes, do we observe the trends and do we understand? Yes, but our knowledge base is more about understanding who is going to buy your property or who's going to, if you're trying to flip the property, or who's going to stay at your property. Our bread and butter is figuring that piece out. And then how do we turn that into an experience? So for example, like if limestone is cheaper there, even if it's cheaper in Indiana, I'm not going to say, let's put limestone in a B minus C property because that still just doesn't make sense. So like at that point in time, pure B plus and A neighborhoods are going to expect the limestone, but we might be able to find that middle ground. So for example, if it's particularly cheap in Indiana, we might say it's worth putting limestone in a class B property because you probably will never find it there, but we're sourcing it cheaper or at the same price point than everything else. And then let's wow them because your B shoppers probably have never seen that in that class and that it's going to go off the market. So it's just really about understanding where the rest of your competition is the key point, is like the key piece.
Yeah, we're like constantly fishermen. Like we're just trying to put our bait in and catch that fish, make sure that we're finding the right thing. So how do you deal with different architecture? So let's say you have a mid-century modern, or let's say here we have a lot of like nice bungalows and they
Uh-huh.
have like arch doors and they have little things that just set them apart. Are you trying to maintain the history of the home and still modernize it? Or how do you give respect to that?
Absolutely. If you can keep a character, so we say that every property, this is one of the things that this is the this is the pure designer in me talking at the moment. And if my other team of assistant designers and designers were here, they would say the exact same thing, which is part of what makes this amazing. It's that to us, every property has a story. It tells a story, and it's been there long before are there, and it'll be there long before after. It's a culmination of all the memories and all the people that have ever been there. So we don't, and that's the other, and this is a huge mistake that I see investors doing, especially when it comes to flipping. And then even sometimes when it comes to just small improvements, like small cosmetic renos in order to sell, they don't understand why a property is not going off of it because they put the newest of the new in it. But they have, for example, tried to take a mid-century modern house and they completely gutted it and did like gray walls, gray floor, because that's what they saw everybody else doing. And they didn't realize that that didn't translate to the actual style of the home itself. Because the type of person who looks at the mid-century modern exterior and that catches their attention, the reason it did is because there's something innate about that particular property that they like. So they probably lean towards that. So if you're going to do a property, lean into what it is, because that done exceptionally well will bring the person to the market, even if it's different than everybody else. People are afraid to have their properties be different because they're afraid that's going to be a risk because that's not proven on the market yet. They're like, everything else is selling and it's done this way, so we have to do it the exact same way. The best businesses in the world that made millions and billions never followed that model. So why do we do that in real estate?
Yeah, you got to break the mold. I mean, so many flips with the same gray paint, white cabinets. It's bleh, it's kind of, and I get it, but I think you have to put a little
Mhm.
spin on it.
Uh-huh.
So for agents who have a client and they are selling, let's say you're selling a house and you
Yeah.
go in the house and you're getting a lot of feedback. Hey, the kitchen's outdated. The
True.
bathrooms are outdated. Sometimes what we'll do is those little things, if the cabinets are okay shape, like I'm thinking an example, they're like this light brown color. They're not bad, but we changed all the nickels out to just black hardware and changed some of the lighting and changed it to nice black fans, those kind of things. But what advice do you have? Let's say that your client's like, okay, so should we reno the whole kitchen and demo the whole thing, or do we just do a couple things here and there? And
True.
I think where I get stuck is they're asking me this, and I know it's going to be a substantial amount of money, and it comes down to what their pain points are. They don't
Yep.
even want the showings to happen, and you want to live through a demo job to make how much more? I mean, that's really hard. And then we come to this conversation where they're like, okay, well, we're going to do a backsplash and new countertops. And my always thought is, and I think everything's situational and you have to meet
Yeah.
people where you're at and really communicate what they're trying
Mhm.
to achieve. But the feedback is, hey, it's an electric stove. They want gas. They want the cabinets different. And for me, it's like, I wouldn't spend the money on that unless you're going to do it all. Like you can't
Mhm.
have to it because you just don't know what they want. So
Yeah,
have you had that situation where you're like, demo the whole thing, just do a little touches? Like what advice do you have for agents with that
for
type
sure.
of vision?
Absolutely. I think the big key here is that it's the difference between a person being emotionally invested in property and viewing it as their property versus viewing it as it is no longer your property. It's actually going to be someone else's property. So,
Take the emotion
they're,
out of it.
yes, they're thinking of it in terms of like what they want to see and what they would want to see if they were to come in a house and purchase. So, and this is where we get to come in with the visuals because, you can suggest to someone, keep those cabinets, but we're just going to update the hardware. And they're like, what do you mean? Like, these are terrible. These are old. What are you talking about? Where we've actually done the same thing in certain properties where they have like the older brown cabinets, but we can modernize the countertops, for example, and modernize the hardware. But then we're going to add like a super contrasting, like chic matte black paint in a certain area of it, and all of a sudden you no longer have the same kitchen. And that was done vastly cheaper than buying all two cabinets. And then because what they don't understand to them is just cabinets, but what they're not learning is that like, oh, once you take the cabinets out, then we got to start talking about the backsplash, which means that we have to repair walls. And then once you
Mhm.
kind of repair walls, we really hope everything else underneath those walls is really good because if it's not really good and we see it, now we have to fix it. Like all these like extra levels that
The
they
rabbit
don't
hole that
know.
you could
Correct. Because they bought the house as is. So they don't know. To them, it's just like, oh, let's just throw some cabinets in there. So like there are ways to do that. And like, and then even then the other option that we'll talk about. So we usually talk about three different types of options. Like what's the most expensive, what's your midpoint, what's your low point. And then if you spend this, this is how it's going to affect your ROI. Like you can spend more here, but you're going to lose this on your return. Like this is not going to make a difference. So for example, like oftentimes the upper what you could do most and what you can do at mid is actually going to get you the same amount depending on what class your property is in.
Mm,
That's the big thing is knowing the class and being able to describe it that way. Because someone could come in and have all brand new countertop or brand new cabinets and they'll be like, oh my God, this is amazing. This is gorgeous. These are beautiful. But that entire set of brand new kitchen, because once you replace cabinets, you're replacing countertops, blah, blah, blah.
mhm.
That entire thing is not going to increase what they're paying you. It just means that they're going to put a bid. Like they're not going to say, oh, I want to pay you an extra $30,000 on what you're asking for because you have a brand new kitchen, like in relation to what the market, because people are going to assess what their max price point is, no matter what. They're getting everything they can at that max price point. And there are exceptions in markets, and that's where your guys' expertise comes in. But if you start to talk to your your client in a way where you have to understand people are getting they're allowed to be greedy at this stage.
Mhm.
Buyers are allowed to be greedy, and that's their mindset. They're trying to get everything they absolutely can at the lowest price point they can get it in, or if they're spending their max, you have to understand they're not going to spend anymore. So, like, you don't want to throw so much in that you're throwing the baby out with the bathtub. Like, you
Mm.
want to throw just enough in where they're looking at everything else on the market and they want to choose you, but you don't want to waste your dollars. So,
Yeah.
like, it's about like trying to get them to understand that. So, like, I would say instead of replacing the entire kitchen, how about this? How about if we got new cabinets for the bottom because we have to replace the countertops anyways, but we don't even bother buying upper cabinets at all. And instead we find modern or floating or other type of shelving off of Amazon. Because believe
Mhm.
it or not, Amazon and Wayfair actually has
Oh,
really
I
good stuff
agree. I subscribe.
which people don't understand. And then we can create a vibe based on upper shelving that's vastly different, but you've now spent half the cost of your new kitchen by ordering less cabinets because you planned it out. So,
Yeah.
like, there are things to be done. And hey, how about since we're replacing countertops, let's choose where. So like if you have a kitchen island and your budget really needs to stay budget, how about we do a butcher block island that we can order off of Lumber Liquidators because you can get that for $800 and seal it, and then do modern countertops in another place. Like there are ways to combine it to get a different look and a feeling, because that's usually what it's addressing the fear. Most people are afraid that if they don't put everything into it, that they're not going to be able to sell their house. And if they're selling their house, there's a reason why they're selling. Most people aren't selling their houses just because willy-nilly they can afford to lose a house. They're selling a house because they either need the money or they need to move somewhere, or there's some like big major life reason. So if
Mhm.
we can address that fear and say, hey, you don't have to put in everything you have in order to do this. No matter what, we're going to sell your house. Our goal is to get you more money for selling your house. You're not going to be stuck with it.
Hmm. That's really interesting. I'm just thinking about just the classifications of what class the house is at and then what finishes you put in. How are you, I guess two things. How are you
Mhm.
classifying and know what class it's in to start? Like what's that
Yeah.
process? Um and then you're reverse engineering from there. But how do you initially find out if this is A, B, C? Is it a price point or how do you figure that out? Real estate rock stars, it's Sarah Denig, and today I'm telling you the holidays are over. If you are still nursing that holiday hangover and your whole goal for the year was just survive this season, it's time to level up. Come join us March 4th through 6th in Austin, Texas. This is a life-changing experience where people are so open. They will share, you will increase your business. If you have goals and you want to execute, come join us. We are better together, and I cannot wait to see you guys. Take this chance on yourself. Trust me.
That is such a good question because so this is where like the realtor knowledge really comes into place. So this is like because the class A and class B's and class C's vary in very different markets because like a class B in Colorado might actually be like a class A in North Carolina. Like it could be very different, but that is where it really comes into that specific market niche. So when we talk about classes, we talk about it in the sense of determining who is going to buy the property. So for us, a class A property means that it is your highest socioeconomic person, the richest person, they're buying in class A's.
In that hyper local area.
Correct.
Okay.
So their expectations of what they're buying
Right.
and what becomes very different. And
So
then a
like a
class
million
then,
dollars in California gets you, barely anything. But here in Indiana, that could be a class A.
100%.
Right. So then
Yeah.
you're reverse engineering from there what the
Right.
finishes are and going into it.
Yeah.
Well, how do you guarantee I know that it's experience at this point, but when you
Yep.
first started this, how can you guarantee that if they do these finishes in class A, that you're going to net $30,000 more? Because, we don't have a crystal ball. We just have
Yeah.
to
No.
sometimes the market doesn't lie. We have to put it on the market. But if you're saying, hey, you need to spend $30,000 on this project and you're going to net 60 more, how do you know that? And is it happening? And if it doesn't, then how does that work?
Yeah, no, it's such an interesting question, honestly, because I remember when I first started flipping, that was the big thing. I was like, okay, is my budget even right? Like,
Right.
I hope my budget's on point. When I created my budget, when I started flipping, I always start with budget first, no matter what, because that was my starting piece to start cutting away. That's how I like gamified everything essentially, was how can I reduce my budget? So my budget was based on how much I wanted to make. Like I built in what I wanted my profit margin to be, period. So this was my profit margin that I want to get. So I cannot create a budget that will eat into my profit margins. Like, so did it backwards and started with what I wanted to get first.
So what are some
And then,
numbers? Like I wanted to
yeah,
make
so 30,000, like my first flip,
okay.
I wanted to net at least 30,000,
And how
which
long is
was,
that project going to take you start to finish until you get paid?
that project was 4 months.
Okay.
Yeah. And it was a complete gut. It was, again, it was pre-COVID. Some markets you can actually still run a project in that amount of time. I will say it's going to be interesting to see, especially just, no matter what you think about a new president or not, but it happens with every new president. whenever you have a change in power, those type of effects on markets and on real estate, and more importantly on labor costs for doing these type of things, it's going to be really to see interesting, like how that develops over the next, 6, 7 months. Um, but always start with budget. How much do you want to make? Like, period. And then from there, create your budget. So I wanted to make 30K, which meant that I think my budget, mind you, it's been a little while. I remember how much I wanted to make. But I think my budget, I might have been around 60 is what it was. And
This
I
was the
think
reno budget?
no, 60 was my reno budget.
Okay, yeah.
So yeah. So I wanted 30, which meant that I could spend no more than 60 on the house to
Okay.
renovate. So I'd gotten a few quotes. And then once I got my quotes because at the time I wasn't a GC and I had people who could help, but like I had to go through somebody. So I always had them separate the labor costs and the material costs, no matter what. Like, sometimes you'll get a lot of people who help, um, GCs or even handymen who like to combine them together. And the reason they combine them together is because they get to upsell and mark up where they're getting materials. That's just how they do their business. It's standard, whether you like it or not. That's just standard.
And I
So
think that's a
your
good thing
rate,
too for new agents. When you are starting to flip and you get a scope of work, they will typically not tell you the exact margins on each thing because they will make more money on, say, flooring, but they might not make as much off of the cabinets. So they don't want to show all their cards, and they also don't want you to piecemeal them because they don't want you to go to somebody else for flooring when they just give you a really good day on cabinets, because at the end of the day, they have to make money too. So a lot of
100%.
times they don't even release the price, break down until you sign the contract, at least the experience that I've had.
Yep. Yep. So I would always ask, I'll say, and I'm upfront with them. Because I would rather use one person because it helps logistically and it helps keep people efficient. So I would be very clear with them. And that's a great point. I would be very candid and be like, I want to only work with one person, but I also need to keep within a budget. And there are some choices and changes that I might make based on where our budget lands. So I need you to separate my labor costs from my material costs. And they're like, okay, I'll separate them. As long as like they know they're getting the labor, that's fine. So, and I think agents and people make the mistake of trying to cut costs on labor first. That's not where you should cut it first. You cut costs on your material first. That's your biggest chance of cost saving because your labor is going to have ramifications if you cut it the wrong way. Your material costs, if you cut that the right way, it can actually make it better. So it's just a matter of where you're cutting your costs. So I would cut costs on the materials and I'd say, all right, he's quoting $350 per square foot, for example, on LVP. I know that I can get it. I'm not going to go to Home Depot and get the gray LVP because that's everywhere. I know that if I open a contracting account with Lumber Liquidators, I can get $250 or $225 per square foot. And now we've worked with our trades for so long that they even give us a better deal because we bring them such consistent business and I can mark down that price. All right, cool. Savings there.
And Home Depot may be $450 a square foot for that same
they're
flooring.
being so like,
So where are you going to get this $250?
Unfortunately, Lumber Liquidators is actually going out of business
Oh, it is.
this year. I know, but they were a
Your
good
go-to.
source. Floor and Decor is another price point. They have lots of different ones that come on sale in different. So like always look for the sale. And the other thing too that people don't know exists, and this was some of my favorite places to find. So like on this flip, I'll never forget. So we paid $300 for all the tile in the entire house. So kitchen, like all the way floor to ceiling kitchen, backsplash, the whole thing. We paid $300 because I was searching on Facebook Marketplace and I was just seeing what was out there. And there are a ton of wholesalers that use places like Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace where they are buying basically truckloads of Lowe's things or truckloads of discontinued items.
Wayfair, truckloads of Wayfair.
Correct. They put it out there and they're willing to sell, but more importantly, they're willing to bargain. So I remember walking into this guy's warehouse and he was like, yeah, no, I just bought all this off a guy. And now I'm just trying to sell it. He was like, I thought it was going to be a good deal or I thought it was going to be lucrative, but a lot of people don't buy in bulk. And I'm like, I will buy in bulk. You and I are going to be friends, and I will buy from you all the time. So he ended up becoming a source where I would just say, I've got another project. Like, what tile do you have in stock? And he'd send me all the pictures, and that's how I would choose. So, like, it might not have been the tile that I would have choose normally and been like, oh, this is actually what I want. But I did choose it and be like, this works. And this is saving me so much value in my budget that it was worth it. And it still was different than everything else that everybody else was
Yeah.
putting in.
That
So,
is
like,
such a pro tip. So last week, so what I do is I put together a vision board. So, and I go room by room. So here's the primary bathroom. Here's the bathtub. These are the vanities that are off Amazon. I usually get a budget and they're like, okay, 500 per vanity or whatever. I found one that I love. It was 350, winning there. I pick out the lighting. I wanted this really tall ceiling. So we wanted to do like the round arch mirrors with the lighting in it.
yeah.
Love that. Picked out the tile, picked out the niches for the shower, all the things. And then I put it together on a vision and I put it all like so I can see it. And then I link everything to this is the Amazon link, this is the floor and decor link, this and that. Then I send it to my husband. And then my husband looks at it and he's like, I love that. But then he finds that exact same thing. He'll go on Facebook Marketplace, which I would never do because I'm not going to go to a stranger's house that I don't know. But if he wants to do it, by all means, be luck. So, the same bathtub that I wanted that was 1,600, he got for like 700 or something and got them to deliver it. So I think if you respect the hustle and you put in the work on those small details, and that's a good way to get started to save some money. When you get to some level, maybe that stuff's not important to you, but where we're at, like, all those dollars count in these profit margins because we really want to set ourselves up for success so we can keep this ball rolling. So great pro tip, but I love finding, and I love that you developed a relationship with that somebody like that. And I think that that's what this business is all about is relationships. And you need to find those people that you trust and they're going to give you a quality product. And it might not be, like you said, you might have had this vision that this is what it was going to be like, but you know what? This also really works and it's still a vibe and you're saving a lot of money. And that's what we're here to do. We're not here just to play. We need to make money.
100. That's it. That's it. And I understand. And this is where because granted, don't get me wrong. I could be that designer that spends $1 million on a property and
Yeah,
be very
sure.
happy. There are a lot of things that I would love to buy for people that just not within a budget.
Yeah.
But so I know why people don't go to them. So
Mhm.
but that doesn't mean that you can't, it doesn't mean that it's not accessible.
Mhm.
So if the mentality for people like us is to come in and partner with you guys, so
Mhm.
like we're not enemies, we're actually all getting the same goal. And the
Mhm.
goal is a good ROI. And like that is totally feasible. And then as you start to make these like relationships, like we have met people who have entire warehouses all over the country and they collect the craziest things, the coolest things, the most unique things. And like we
Mhm.
have our rolling index. So like we can reach out and be like, hey, and then I have an assistant designer whose primary goal is actually just to scour Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist before we go to a place.
Oh, I
Because
love
those
that.
change, yeah, those change so frequently. And we know that we've gotten, so like, for example, our last two houses that we helped work on, we found like antique headboards that were only like $100, but they're these beautiful wooden, highly carved antique headboards. But we turned those into range hoods because
Oh,
we were
wow.
doing like floating because of budget. We didn't do upper cabinets. We did floating shelves to save on budget. But instead of spending anywhere from $600 to $3,000 on a
On a
range
hood.
hood because the space needed it, we were able to actually have our handyman convert $100 beautiful antique headboard that now is a very one of a kind focal piece for that kitchen. And it's super
Amazing.
unique and it super stands out, but it's all still within the budget. So like there are
Mhm.
just ways to, everything is figure outable is what we like to say. Like you can figure it out. You just have to like
Mhm.
have enough
Pivot,
people
pivot,
willing to do
pivot,
it.
pivot.
Yeah. Well, 100%.
So you could whoa, sorry about that.
You're good.
So, Cord, you work with the realtors. If you have a client, so this is just trying to wrap my head around. If you have a client, let's say they find the perfect house, great location, but it doesn't fit functionality of their needs, we can call you and you can come put together a project to renovate the house. If you have the capital and you find a flip and it really makes sense, and you feel overwhelmed with the design, staying on the budget, or just getting started, they can call you and you can come up with a plan for them. So are you flying to this, like, are you flying to Indiana and walking through with me? And how are you getting paid?
No, that's a great question. So it depends on how involved. So like, let's take the flip, for example, because that's the most. So like a lot of things are done virtually, but again, my team travels. That's super important to what we do. It depends on how involved the person wants to be. So if we do a flip, is some flippers, they're like, no, we're experiencing this. We'll project manage it. That's totally fine. We just need you to do some consultations on choices. All right, cool. Understand. Other ones, especially newbies, are like, I don't know. I'm really nervous to like project manage a GC. I've never done this before. Like, can you do that? So we will actually project manage for them, and then we'll incorporate them into like seeing things and seeing how it's done if they want to. And others just want to be passive. And they're like, can you just do this so that I can like step aside and do the work? Yes, we can do this too. So it's just kind of like the different levels. So if you want us involved to the point where we're flying out and walking and then putting, phase one, phase two, phase three, and putting specific objectives and logistics and ordering, et cetera, we can do that. And that's more hands-on. Or if you want to be, to do the hands-on yourself and you just want on the consultant side, then we can do that too. And I think you brought up a really good point earlier on about the whole like AI piece. It's really interesting we just had this conversation a couple of days ago to see how AI is completely changing this industry, and it will change
Changing
everything.
everything.
It's changing absolutely everything. So I fully predict that AI on not just the design side, but like the design side, contracting side, real estate side, all of these aspects, AI is going to replace certain jobs in the next 12 months. So like my firm has been super intentional about not just how we incorporate AI, but really learning the skill set to be able to prompt and learn as it comes out so that we can still be relevant in a niche that probably will see most people trying to do things themselves and not being able to achieve it. So, having said that, you look at the staging industry, like, I mean, your realtors know, like AI came out and like within a year, the staging industry is forever changed. It's almost gone. Like, because now you can virtually stage. So like the amount of stagers that you saw that did exist that now have to exist are minimal at best, or they're in very specific markets and niches. So AI is completely changing this whole scheme of everything that we're talking about, even from you guys to us and everything. So like we are really honing in on doing more than just making it about renderings, but actually making it about translating our knowledge that we've gathered over the past 4 or 5 years and really putting that, like my assistants and I, we are spending time daily on our prompting skills and making a dictionary of things that we know that we're going to need to translate into prompts so that we can actually work in this field of AI in the future, which only goes to serve and help you guys and your clients in the future to be better and more efficient at this.
Yeah, that is something I do all my own staging. So I haven't even thought about the professional stager and how how it's changed. But you walk into a house and it's empty. I still do think there's a lot of value there, but it is interesting how that virtual staging has kind of changed that whole thing.
Correct. It's value now, but the value is going to be less when people can actually put on a virtual reality headset in the next 6, 7 months and walk the space in a warehouse and be
Mhm.
okay with it.
And I think it's one of those things where you shouldn't be scared of AI. You just need to figure out where
You
is
can
there a
know.
gap in there and what do we need to pivot to? And, the only constant is change. So what's your next step? How are you going to still add value to people when it changes? And that's just the reality of life. So it's a hard lesson, but it is what it is. So are you charging the client, and how is the payment structure for
Yeah. So we charge the actual client. So for our realtors that come to us, they give us multiple clients. We actually have a referral fee. So we'll give them a cut, whatever the client pays us. And then we do the same with property managers. So like we work with a lot of property manager clients who have basically the same style setup. And then unless the realtor obviously themselves is an actual client, then it's a different, we treat them as a client. But for most of
Mhm.
them, we're charging the actual client. The realtor basically is just a, hey, this person is a source and a trusted resource. I know that they can get us to where we need to get to sell your property. And then we make the actual contract with the client. And then the realtor, we will oftentimes use your guys' knowledge to be like, hey, this is like what we're thinking, but I just want to double shoot it across what you see across the markets. If we did it this way, this is what I think will get a return, but you know the market best. Can we confirm that with you? And like we work that part in tandem.
Yeah. How are you finding the trades locally? Because like, if you come into Indiana, how do you know who's a great contractor?
For
'Cause,
sure.
like, I live
No.
here and I'm constantly going through this.
Oh, that is the biggest time suck that we have. Like it is. We
Like, you need a
are fortunate.
traveling crew, you know?
For sure. Well, so we have our own handymen, and we have our own handymen that are actually licensed GCs in certain states, or that we know can qualify in other states if you're doing a certain amount. Like in North Carolina, if it's under 30, you don't actually need a licensed GC, that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
So, like, we can fly them out if it's cheaper to do it. Sometimes in some markets it is because the handymen are so bad, or the turnover with them, they're so busy, like you don't want to trust. So it can actually be more beneficial because if we're coming in, actually, especially if we're doing setup of properties too, the entire team will come out and we'll actually stay and we'll do the whole setup and all those things. So
Mhm.
that's what we do. But having said that, we've made relationships with multiple GCs across the country. And then we have enough relationships with realtors that often will be like, hey, do you have a recommendation of someone that you already trust that you worked with? And if not, then okay, let's start doing that. We've gotten really good at making a lot of calls via Thumbtack.
How many projects are you working at a time? How big's your team?
Yeah. So to date, we're at 4 years of being like officially a firm. We're at 142 projects. So we're averaging around 30 projects a year. And
Wow.
those are not the like the include those are not the virtual. So these are like entire houses. So these are the renos, the flips, the hotels, and the Airbnbs. So I would like the team is expanding even more. So our goal is to expand that. We're actually in the process of franchising so that other people can have the same model in different
Mhm.
areas across the country. So that just means that like the reach and our ability to handle more. So all of that is to say, and I guess I should say for context, your average like normal interior residential design firm does about 10 to 12 projects a year. So we try to stay on the tripling of that. That's our fine balance of how many we can take.
Mhm.
And it flexes just depending on how big a project is.
Yeah. Yeah, what's your "oh crap" fund are you putting on each project? Like, you get in there and there's mold everywhere and you have to pay all this
Yes.
money. Are you
Yeah. No,
filtering that into each deal?
for sure. So that's something that we, depending on what the project is, we have a very candid discussion with them about. So if it's just a residential person that's just trying to sell their house, then it's the conversation of, look, okay, right now we're at cosmetic level because we just want to sell your house and want to get on the market as soon as possible. And oftentimes they will, like you mentioned earlier, suggest things, and this is where we push back and say, okay, the thing is, if we go this route, we are opening up a rabbit hole, which means that we could discover all these other things. Is that a risk that you're willing to take? If that's a risk that they're willing to take, then it becomes all right, if that's a risk you're willing to take and we have to stay in your budget, you're actually possibly lowering your ROI, just so you know. But if you're willing to possibly increase and pad it, then that's fine. But again, this goes back to the emotional piece. And then on the flipper side, we always have a padded budget. So like that's just, it's not a, because worst case scenario, never use it, then that's just extra that you didn't have to do.
Set that
You didn't have to
expectation from the
spend.
get though, so it's not
Yeah.
the conversation's not as hard. I think any communication that you can do on the front, of what ifs, and it's not being a Debbie Downer, it's being honest and real and setting boundaries. And, you know, and I say this all the time, these reality shows make it look so glamorous, but there are things that really come up and it is stressful and it
For
is
sure.
money and it is time and it is
Yeah.
emotion. And it's just trying to keep the wheels on the bus, keep the
Yep.
project moving forward. not getting emotional about it, figuring out a plan. Maybe that did happen. Maybe we have $10,000 of issues that we didn't know. Well, guess what? Maybe we have to go back to the design and pivot and edit and edit and edit and figure out
Yep.
what stays in the budget, because at the end of the day, you still have to make money. So, and
$100.
every deal's not a huge win. But I think that especially, I think for new agents, it's not to be scared to get started. I think this is a
No.
great opportunity to pair with somebody, especially on your first few ones, someone like you who can kind of, because they're gonna learn through this experience
Yeah.
if they wanna try to flip. And as an agent, you have the knowledge of the comps. You hyper local know the area.
Yeah.
But if you just need help to get started, this might be a really good ease into the process. So you feel like
Absolutely.
you have a little bit of hand holding and experience of somebody who's worked in all over, 22 states, 3 countries, 150 what if flips. Like, that experience is invaluable. And it could be even like a mentorship is how I'm seeing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And there have been instances, and it's so funny you talk about like realtors pairing together. There have been instances, like, especially in small markets, where we've come in and helped realtors with clients, like multiple clients over time. And
Mhm.
then because of the properties that are produced, they're so different and they're selling well that it's actually changing the expectation of what that market is now. You're
Mhm.
creating a new demand instead of having to live within what was given to you. Like, you guys as realtors really have a lot of power to, if smart choices are made, actually change what your market can be.
I mean, you trailblaze the neighborhood, and we tell new agents all the time, become the mayor of your neighborhood. And it's
Uh,
crazy how you can set the bar higher and increase the comps, and you're increasing everybody's equity around you.
yep.
So it's just, you do the work and it comes back to you over time. So it's just a really
Uh-huh.
cool thing to see happen. So as we wrap up, is there any other tips or tricks for the agents or any tips in design, anything else that you would want to share?
Yeah, for sure. So people find me on social media and they actually comment LAF. So I've done what's called the LAF method. It's kind of like what I tell people is your basic premise for any property. I'll actually send them a free guide about how to do it. But basically every property, no matter the purpose is, if you get the looks, the amenities, and the function correct, then you're going to have a winning property. So like, we just break that down into what that means. And if you can keep that as your core segment for how you plan out everything, then like, just a little shortcut.
Okay. Yeah, and, I did wanna mention that you did provide, that in our toolbox, and it's very cool, it's very valuable, and I think it's a good, type pamphlet that you can show to your consumer who might use this product, as kind of an introduction to how that works. So, well, thank you so much. It has been so fun, so many
So much fun.
good I love one of the biggest things that I took about this is we're always, like, looking for deals, and, people are always moving because of death and divorce and,
Uh-huh.
all the different things, but I think that military aspect, to double down on a military base, because there is gonna be such a turnaround, is a great tip for agents to pick up business. Adding
Uh-huh.
value there and kinda being the mayor of a neighborhood like that could really bring you
Yes,
some business. So,
absolutely.
super cool. Well, thank you so much, and we appreciate it.
Awesome. This was amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, real estate rock stars. Have a good day.